Chapter 51. Blinking his eyes several times, Jason had to get used to seeing light through his literal eyes, instead of the eyes of his mind. The time he had spent with Corlin was unbelievable. She had proven to be one of the most insightful, most heartwarming, and wisest individuals that he had ever met. Jason realized how odd it was to feel this way about a synthetic, albeit sentient, life form. While he tremendously enjoyed his time with Corlin, an overwhelming sense of guilt privately locked away in his heart caused Jason to say he needed to get back. He realized Terry would completely understand the reason why he had spent 6 to 8 hours with Corlin, but he still felt it was very rude of him to leave Terry alone for so long. He fully expected her to have retrieved the rest of their party from the lounge where they were supposed to have met, and to have brought them back to the apartment to wait for his return. When Jason emerged from his time with Corlin, the first thing he saw was Terry's face. Looking around, he noticed the others weren't there, and were probably wondering where they had gone. Lynn knew where Terry and Jason had gone, so if need be, she could have brought Dennis and Jose back to the apartment. "I'm sorry I took so long to come back," said Jason. Terry smiled. "I know it seems like you were gone a long time, but you weren't." "Are you sure? It seems like I have been gone for at least 6 hours. Letting out a giggle and brushing back a lock of fiery red hair, she said, "In this world, you were actually gone for about 10 minutes. Jason's eyes went wide and his mouth hung open. "You've got to be kidding." "Nope, not kidding. The first time I went in-world, I was supposed to meet Lynn for lunch shortly after that. When I got out, I was certain I had completely blown out that lunch appointment, but it was only about 15 minutes later." Jason sat there dumbfounded. After a few moments, Terry asked, "How do you feel?" "Actually, I feel great. I feel energized and ready to tackle the world." Terry simply nodded. Jason then added, "But while I really want to compare notes on this, I need to get back to Dennis. Corlin helped on so many levels, and I have to get some critical information to my partner." "That's fine, but I need to make a request," said Terry. "What's that?" asked Jason. "The role this amulet has played in my understanding of the Galimarian people isn't something I have shared with anybody else. I was impressed with you right away, so I knew I could trust you with this information. Most of the military goons walking around here definitely aren't going to get their grubby hands on Corlin if I have anything to say about it. I'd like to ask you not to tell anyone else about what the amulet can do, or about Corlin." "That's a fair request. What about Lynn?" "She's a good friend, but she sometimes has a tendency to be a little loose-lipped, if you know what I mean." Terry grinned. "I gotcha. I won't tell anybody," said Jason. "I'm hoping you will allow me to meet again with Corlin. There's a lot more I want to learn from her, and since I can seemingly live a lifetime in there with hardly any time going by out here, I'd like to leverage all I can learn from her before I go back." "I'll have to get the okay from Corlin, but I don't see why she wouldn't agree to that." Terry and Jason got up to make their way back to the park, where Dennis, Jose, and Lynn were still conversing. As they were about to get on the lift to return back to ground level, Jason said he'd forgotten something in the apartment and would be right back. He was only gone for a couple of minutes, then he returned and they continued on to the park. After arriving, Jason revealed to the rest of the gang that the medicines they had secured weren't the right ones. They needed to get back to Midway Magnetic and, in the meantime, arrange for some alternative medicines to be delivered. After making some private satellite phone calls to the Pentagon, Jason returned to the group with a request. Pulling Terry aside, he said, I'd like to make a request of you. I told the Admiral you were crucial to the success of the mission. So I asked for and received his permission to allow you to return with me to Midway Magnetic, so you can be there in the portal room when I go back. Terry looked away and stared at the city center of New Galimar, contemplating his request. I know going there is an honor since the nature of the technology is super secret. But Terry gestured to the gleaming tropical paradise where they now found themselves. I don't know if I can leave this place. It's my home. Gently putting his hand on her shoulder and turning her around to face him, Jason said, Believe me when I tell you, Terry, that after my amazing experience with Corlin, I empathize with you. I completely understand why you consider yourself Galimarian because, to be quite honest, so do I. This place calls to me like nothing I have ever experienced before. The thing is, he continued, if we don't succeed in what we are attempting to do, then this world you and I love will be destroyed, along with our families and about 7.5 billion others. I originally wanted to do this to save our world. Now I'm doing it because I want to save New Galimar too. It's important enough for me to put my life at risk to make it happen. Terry looked deeply into Jason's eyes, and she saw the same resolute determination she had come to love in Krelon. Since you put it like that, I'd have to be a real jerk not to go. All right, Jason, lead the way. Jason patted her shoulder and, turning to the rest of the group, explained the new arrangements. From that moment onward, the course of events leading to their arrival at Midway Magnetic was certainly a whirlwind that the President of the United States would have been proud of. On the returning jet back to California, Jason spent time reviewing some last-minute preparations. Then, feigning a nap, he borrowed the amulet from Terry and returned to Corlin. He told her the current plans that had been set in motion and spent as much time as possible learning about the Galimarian culture. Like Terry, the more he learned, the more he identified with this beautiful race. After getting home that evening, Jason wrote a letter like no other, addressed to Switzerland. No one knew its contents, not Terry, not even Mickey. He hoped it would never be read, but this was his insurance in case something went wrong. The next morning, after picking up Terry from a local hotel, Jason drove to work where they met Dennis and Diana. Knowing the importance of the trip about to be undertaken, Admiral Brinstock arranged to be present as well, and brought along his assistant, Lieutenant Flume. Upon entering the portal room, Jason saw that the replacement stock of medicines was ready and waiting. After introducing Terry to Diana, Jason then spoke up above the din of conversation. May I have your attention? Admiral Brinstock, off to the side speaking softly to the lieutenant, turned to face Jason. Dennis, who was sitting at his station, stopped typing, and Diana and Terry gave Jason their attention. We are about to do something never before done in the history of man. Jason stopped. With a smile on his face, he continued, in the history of man. That phrase takes on a different meaning now, doesn't it? For as long as mankind has recorded the events of history, several things have always been regarded as unchangeable and unshakable. The ground we walk on, for one, and the inexorable forward march of time. An ancient proverb says, "Time and tide wait for no man." Yet now we are faced with the facts that not only is our world quite shakeable, and our Earth is on the verge of perpetrating its own suicide, but also that time can, in fact, be made to wait. It can be put at our disposal and made subject to our whims. we must take lesson from the brave men and women who, through a sheer act of brute force on their part, and on the part of millions who supported them, faced their fears and helped usher mankind into the space age. They showed bravery beyond compare. Most were able to beat the odds and come back alive. But as the Challenger and Columbia space shuttle disasters showed, some of them didn't come back home. As President Reagan said at the time, "We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them that morning, as they prepared for their journey, waved goodbye, and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God." I now stand before you, a man who is about to slip the sometimes surly bonds of time. I certainly hope this doesn't mean that I am about to touch the face of God, but I wanted to tell you all to know that I do this not because of any desire for glory, but simply because of my love. My love for mankind, my love for my friends, both old and new. But most of all, I do this because of the love of one woman, a woman who shall never know the sacrifice I have made for her. Reaching over to his desk, Jason opened a drawer and produced a bottle of champagne along with some plastic cups. "I'd like to share a drink with my friends and compatriots and ask you to send along all the positive thoughts you can muster." Then after pausing, he said, "I'm gonna need 'em." "Hear, hear," shouted Dennis. "Hear, hear," shouted all the rest in the room, taking a long drag from their cups. After finishing his drink, Jason turned to his partner and longtime friend. "Dr. Green, are you ready?" "Ready on all accounts, Dr. Marcellus. Waiting for you to give the word." Jason smiled. "Dr. Green, the word is given." Dennis smiled. The two men reached under their collars and produced chains they were wearing around their necks. Hanging at the end of each chain was a diminutive USB drive. In the weeks preceding their journey to New Galimar, Jason and Dennis had been working feverishly on refining the software controlling the portal architecture. As a security measure, they devised a lockout system requiring 2 USB keys to be inserted into 2 separate consoles that controlled the portal. Each was separate and distinct from the other, and both were required to activate the portal. The system was designed to be similar to the key locks used with the control systems for nuclear missile silos and submarine-launched ballistic missiles. The two men plugged their thumb drives into the control consoles and turned each 90 degrees to the right. As soon as they did, the bright fluorescent tubes in the room all shut off and were replaced with red lights indicating the system was beginning to power up. Above the portal, 2 large yellow LED digital displays came to life. Both showed the current day and time down to the millisecond. Having to shout over the loud noise of the cryogenics plants coming online, Jason said, "You will notice there are 2 date and time displays shown above the portal aperture. The LED display on the top represents the date and time here locally, whereas the one on the bottom represents the date and time where the portal is currently pointed. Soon you will see those 2 dates and times diverge from each other." Dennis spoke up over the noise coming from the liquid helium pumps and compressors. "Cryogenics systems nominal. Beginning power-up of superconductors." In the background, the massive relays controlling the flow of power into the superconductors began to slam shut. Each time they did, trillions of volts started their march toward the specially formulated ceramic magnets, which had the unique ability to not only handle the tremendous amount of power needed to guide the particle streams, but did so with a smile, just asking for more. By the time the last of the 4 10-foot-tall relays closed, there was a rather significant hum floating around the facility. Looking at his console, Jason now addressed Dennis. Commencing countdown to particle acceleration in 3, 2, 1. Mark! At this point, the control surfaces of the portal architecture altered almost imperceptibly, and by doing so, the particle stream was redirected so that billions of protons, which used to be part of hydrogen atoms, were now directed toward the reaction chamber connected to the portal. As soon as this happened, the region in the middle of the portal aperture started to fill in from the edges with a hazy powder blue field. Eventually, the field closed in on the portal opening itself, and in the middle, a scene came into focus. Since Jason had entered the coordinates of New Galimar as the starting point, all in the portal room were now shown a scene of the same park where they had all, except for the Admiral and his assistant, of course, been standing just 24 hours earlier. Standing near Diana, Terry leaned over and said, "Are you telling me that if I step through that portal right now, I'll instantly be on the island again?" "It's incredible, isn't it?" said Diana, smiling. Leaning in to share something secret, she added in hushed tones, "The other day, they even used it to get Chinese food for lunch. From China." Terry couldn't help but laugh out loud. The subject of their laughter was immediately a cause for interest on the part of all, but Terry understood this wasn't something to discuss while the military was present. Interrupting the light mood, Jason announced, "Commencing time dilation." After entering a couple of keystrokes, the clocks above the portal began to diverge from one another. The display on top didn't change, since that represented the date and time in the portal room. But the readout on the bottom was a different story. It appeared to hesitate for a moment, then stop. In a couple more moments, the time portion of the readout started to move backward, and, as it did, the speed with which it moved steadily increased. "Time dilation rate 1 year per second," said Jason, as his eyes remained locked onto his screen. Terry took a few steps to see what he was looking at. While Dennis's screen was designed to monitor the power flow and the health of the cryogenics plants, which were keeping the superconductors cool, Jason's screen was in charge of the control surfaces that shaped not only the X, Y, and Z coordinates, where the portal was pointed, but also the crucial T coordinate. The T, or time coordinate, was the main thing Jason was watching. As the readout on his screen showed, the X, Y, and Z coordinates remaining static, the T signature was steadily proceeding backwards. In the corner of his screen was a video feed of the scene in the portal aperture, allowing Jason to see what was happening without tearing his eyes away from the screen. The backward progress of the lower LED readout slowed, eventually settling on a date and time approximately 700 years ago. The park scene the team had observed about 10 minutes ago was the same, except for a very important difference. Right there, right in front of them, was the vibrant population of Galimarian men, women, and children. All the adults were strolling along gracefully, and the well-behaved children were playing. Off to the left, there were 3 children, impossible to tell whether they were girls or boys, who were completely fascinated with something that looked like a butterfly. One allowed the butterfly to land on his or her hand, and the others were studying it with a look of sheer delight on their faces. The interest of these children wasn't lost on the other children. Several walked over to see what was so interesting. On the now famous bench in the middle of the park, a man and woman, who both appeared to be about 30 years old, were talking with each other. He was comfortably dressed in a billowy long-sleeved shirt that had no buttons on the front, and she was in a beautiful dress which looked like it was made of chiffon, containing several of the same colors as the park. Her hair had small flowers inserted in the left side, while allowing her hair to hang down on the right in loose curls. She had somehow pinned up her hair on the left, and the small flowers laid a path disappearing down her back. It was late afternoon, the time Jason had chosen to ensure as many as possible would be present when he arrived. Earlier, he thought perhaps he ought to create garb somewhat matching that of the Galimarians. But for the Galimarians to take him seriously, he decided not only did he need to be dressed very differently from them, but as many people as possible needed to be present for an arrival which would be very surprising to them. The time had come. The portal was ready. Jason was ready. The correct medicines were ready. All the planning, all the science, all the soul-searching, all came down to this moment. Now there was nothing left to do but take that one small step. Jason stood up from his console and extended his hand to his compadre Dennis. Ignoring Jason's hand, Dennis came in for a very hearty man-hug. Gently hitting Jason's upper back with his closed fist, he told him, "You get your butt back here. Don't make me come and get you." "You got it, partner." Stepping back, Jason hugged both Diana and Terry. Admiral Brinstock and Lieutenant Flume maintained their stoic stances, observing the events as they unfolded, and made no effort to step forward. Jason was quite happy not even acknowledging their presence, since there was certainly no love lost between them. The cold look on the Admiral's face spoke volumes about his opinion of Jason, much better than the fake grandpa act he had been using lately. Turning around, Jason strapped on his backpack and picked up 2 large cases with handles. Stepping toward the portal field, he stopped for a moment, glancing over his shoulder at the 6 people looking back at him. Turning to face the portal again, Jason took his step into time and destiny. In previous transportations, Dennis had been the one to do the traveling. Going to China was the first time, and Dennis said the trip there and back was rather unremarkable. Jason wasn't sure if that was really true, or whether Dennis had just been brandishing a sporty bravado of some sort. When Jason's body was first touched by the surface of the field, it seemed to spread around his body, even though some of it seemed to be still in the portal room. Completely enveloped by the field, the immediate sensation Jason noticed was an instant change in ambient noise around him. The loud noise of the portal mechanics was instantly replaced by the peaceful, almost melodious chirps of birds nesting in the nearby trees. The sound of the ocean and the animal life around him was suddenly pierced by a quenched shriek off to Jason's right. Turning in that direction, he saw a woman standing there with a man, her hand covering her mouth. The woman and man were looking directly at him, and only now did Jason realize that, without much pomp and circumstance, he just became the first time traveler in this small corner of the universe. Looking behind him, he couldn't see the portal room. He couldn't see or hear the machinery. Nothing. He knew they were still watching him from the portal room, but from his perspective, it was impossible to know he was being watched. The woman to his right said to the man, "Who is it, Bonan? Where did he come from?" The man didn't reply, but those in close proximity to Jason started to recede from him. From their perspective, he had appeared out of thin air. Within moments, there was quite a commotion surrounding Jason, everyone observing how different he was. One man said to another, "Look at his ears. I don't think he's Galimarian." Another said, "I've never seen anybody else clothed like that." Jason placed the bags he was carrying down on the ground as a sign of non-aggression, and simply stood there with his hands clasped together in front of him. He wanted all to know they were not in any danger. One of the women finally said, "I've seen someone like this before, but you're not going to believe who he looks like." One of the others asked, "Who? Who does he look like?" "He looks human." There was a sudden intake of breath on the part of all upon the realization that one of the barbarians, who were the dominant species on this planet, was now standing in their midst. How he got there was only one of a myriad of questions starting to float amongst them as they looked at each other, then back at Jason, then back to each other. Eventually, one of the individuals in the group said, "Everybody, please listen." The flow of conversation died down until that man was the only one speaking. "I agree, this one standing before us must be human. How he got here without anybody seeing him arrive is certainly a mystery, but he must be terribly bewildered at all he sees here. I don't want to scare him." Jason could see they now needed to learn he wasn't what they thought he was. Remember something he learned from Corlin. Jason put his open palms together and, while bowing, uttered a greeting in the Galimarian language. "May you have peace, my fellow Galimarians." This caused a very sharp intake of breath from everyone present. What Jason couldn't know was everyone in the portal room, except Terry, were equally shocked to hear him communicate in a language they had never heard before. They looked at Terry, who had been interpreting what the Galimarians were saying. She explained this greeting was a sign of respect and was sure to break the ice. "How is it you know our language?" asked one of the men standing close to the center of the circle, now surrounding Jason. "To answer that, there is much I have to tell you," replied Jason. "But before revealing the answer, I request, under the provisions of testimonial law, that I be allowed to speak before the Grand Council. When I do, the answers to all your questions will be made clear." The fact that Jason, a human, was not only fluent in the Galimarian language, but also familiar with testimonial law, was staggering to all present. The same one who asked the last question stepped forward. Placing his right hand on Jason's opposing right shoulder, he said, "It is evident we have much to discover. In our own tongue, you have invoked the right to request audience before the Grand Council. Normally, that privilege is only afforded to Galimarian people, but in this case I think an exception will be made. If it is to the Grand Council you wish to speak, then to the chamber of the Grand Council you will go. Please follow me." The throng of individuals centered around Jason left the park and walked toward the center of the city. As they walked, Jason was flanked by the same individuals who had been asking questions about and speaking with him in the park. Since it was going to take some time to get to the Grand Council chambers, Jason decided to break the ice a little more. "This is a beautiful city you have. It is hard to believe you've been here for thousands of years." "It appears you have us at a disadvantage," said the Galimarian man. "My name is Triac. What may I call you?" "My name is Jason Marsalis. You may simply call me Jason." "It is a pleasure to meet you, Jason. I am very eager to learn from you the answers to our questions," said Triac. "And you will. I realize I am a little mysterious in my response, but trust me when I say the reality I have to share with you is even stranger than you can imagine." "Your very presence is already something stranger than I would have imagined. I hope you don't take offense when I say that having a conversation with a species we always thought was far too primitive for intelligent conversation has already gone beyond all previous expectations. No offense taken, said Jason. To be honest, I don't blame you for considering humans barbaric. As they were talking, the subject matter of the conversation Jason and Triac were having rippled back through the rest of the crowd. By the time they reached the building where the Grand Council chambers were located, all in the crowd of about 75 people were aware of what was discussed. Seeing as you already know so much about us, said Triac, you're probably aware you will need to wait outside while I go in and announce to the council coordinator your arrival, and that you have requested a meeting with the council. Placing his right hand on the opposing right shoulder of Triac, Jason bowed his head and said, I await your return. Triac bowed his head in response, then retreated toward the office of the coordinator, shaking his head back and forth in disbelief. Jason sat on a bench surrounded by the original crowd. As time passed, a growing throng of Galimarians came to the courtyard outside the Grand Council building to see the phantasm who appeared out of thin air in the park. As was always the case with the young, no matter what species, they came near to see Jason up close. He would engage them in some simple talk, and soon all were disarmed by Jason's engaging, gregarious nature. The general feel of the gathering took on a somewhat festive feel, and the more Jason observed all around him, the more he fell in love with these amazing people. They were calm, tranquil, peaceful, and serene. Each of them was intelligent and self-assured, and seemed to wear their intelligence only as an accessory. The women were dressed in elegant flowing apparel, featuring fabrics both opaque yet transparent. As beautiful as the women were, Jason observed the men were equally handsome. They were suave and gracious as they attended to those who were apparently their mates. Dressed in outfits that accentuated their masculine features, each and every one was the picture of health and vitality. Eventually, Triac returned, and walking next to him was another Galimarian man dressed in what Jason had learned from Corlin to be the traditional garb of one who occupied an office of oversight. As Triac and the other man approached, Jason stood. Jason, this is Insolvent. He is the... Jason interrupted. The coordinator for the Grand Council. Putting his palms together and bowing, he said, It is an honor to meet you, Lord Insolvent. A very astonished coordinator looked over to Triac, then back at Jason. Putting his own palms together and bowing, Insolvent replied, No, the honor is mine, Jason. When Triac told me about your appearance in the park and your request to address the council, I thought his story was less than credible. Now that I have witnessed you for myself, I can see you should indeed be heard by the council. If you will follow me, I will call an emergency session of the council immediately. With that, Jason picked up his backpack and cases and accompanied Lord Insolvent into the antechamber where speakers customarily waited. Triac explained he would return to his own home, where he would tune in and listen to all Jason had to say. He wanted to make sure his wife and children were aware of Jason's arrival and of what he was going to say. For a time, Jason was alone, and the room was quiet. It took him by complete surprise when the entire unremarkable wall to his left suddenly changed into a floor-to-ceiling, wall-to-wall video screen. The scene was the same one Corlin had shown him once before, the chamber of the Grand Council. The members were beginning to filter in and take their seats. It took about 10 minutes for the chamber to fill, but eventually all members of the council were present. About the time the coordinator took the stage, a Galimarian man who appeared to be an assistant to the coordinator came into the room and said Jason would be asked to come to the stage very soon and that he should follow him. The coordinator began to speak.
Lords and ladies of the Grand Council of New Galimar, I thank you for responding to my call for an emergency session. I'm sure some of you might be aware of the reason why I have called this meeting, but to erase any speculation, I am simply going to relate what I was told. As many of our fellow lords and ladies were relaxing in the park near the northern spire, seemingly out of nowhere an individual appeared. The clothing of this person was different, but what was truly remarkable was the man standing in the middle of the park,
the coordinator paused,
was human.
There was an instantaneous outbreak of hushed but impassioned words passed back and forth around the chamber. The coordinator held up his hands and said,
Council members, please.
It was no use. The coordinator had to allow the members to settle themselves down before he could continue.
Council members, there is more you will find equally amazing. This human not only somehow found himself onto our island, but he is fluent in our language and was familiar enough with testimonial law to request a session to speak before you now.
Turning to his right, he held out his arm toward Jason, who by this time was approaching the podium.
I give you now the human, Jason.
As opposed to the uproar that existed moments before, the chamber was now completely devoid of sound, as if the Galimarians weren't even breathing. Jason approached the podium and set his cases and backpack down to the side. Stepping up to the lectern, he gripped both sides and scanned his eyes across the audience of Galimarian elders. After a few seconds of silence, Jason began to speak. Lords and ladies of the Grand Council of New Galimar, and to all those tuned into these council proceedings from their homes, I carry with me the greetings of my people. I know my simple presence before this esteemed council is something unexpected, and I wish to thank you for allowing my intrusion. With these first disarming words, Jason suddenly toppled years of isolationism on the part of all Galimarians, who had assumed the barbarism witnessed when they first arrived had continued. For thousands of years, your people have lived on this amazing oasis, living, laughing, and loving in peace and harmony. Your culture is centered around discovery and the pursuit of happiness found therein. As I began learning more and more about you, I discovered your culture is not dissimilar from my own voyage into the realms of learning. I, too, have found great satisfaction in learning all I can, then passing along that knowledge. I am certain, as time goes on, and we learn more from each other, there will be an interchange of thought between our species, which will be mutually beneficial. One of the first things asked of me was, how did I come to be standing, suddenly, in the middle of the park, where Triac found me? I will warn you now, the answer to that question will be difficult for you to believe. But my very presence before this council should be considered proof that what I'm about to tell you is true. My name is Jason, but among my people I am a scientist and a doctor. My complete name is Dr. Jason Marsalis, and the field of study I specialize in is high-energy physics. As part of my work, I experiment with many different things to achieve a fuller understanding of the world around me. Like you and your culture, my quest is to discover all I can about the universe and how it is constructed. Not too long ago, one of my experiments led me to discover something that, for the longest time, our people thought was impossible: time travel. As Jason had assumed, this revelation caused an all-new uproar. He respectfully waited for the clamor to recede before continuing to speak. I know this is something that will take some getting used to, but my very presence and the fact I am so well versed with your culture proves I am telling the truth. I come from a time in the future, approximately 700 years from now. It is a time when humankind has progressed significantly in terms of our understanding of the universe and the world around us. Yet, our culture is in its infancy. It is a time when we have progressed so far, but, like a young child, we are still vulnerable. This means we are not only powerful, but unless we use that power wisely, it will result in our own undoing. Jason's mention of this was by design. In his long conversations with Quirlin, she had told Jason of experiences the Galimarians suffered through with planets like Traxxas, where Traxians used technology Galimar had supplied, only to end up eradicating themselves from existence. Still, Jason smiled as he continued, with guidance from advanced cultures such as yours, I am certain we will be able to weather the storm of our own cultural and technological puberty. With the outbreak of laughter from those assembled in the council chamber, Jason knew he was breaking through to all those listening. After the laughter died down, Jason added, "Normally, I would not have come back in time. As your philosophers have no doubt pondered, altering the timeline of the past would most certainly alter the course of events in history, resulting in catastrophe in the present. Unfortunately, there are mitigating circumstances that required me to risk this voyage. On your island, you have the tectonic stabilization machine, which continued to run properly well into the century previous to the one I come from. However, approximately 100 years before I left to come here, your machine ceased to function. As a result, widespread earthquakes and volcanic activity began, and they have continued during the time of my generation. You are probably asking yourselves why it ceased to function, and why it wasn't immediately repaired by your engineers? I must again warn you, the answer to that question will be equally difficult to hear, if not more so, than what I have already shared with you. The answer is that your society is in grave danger of extinction due to an event about to occur exactly 30 days from today." Jason expected this to cause consternation among those assembled. To the contrary, all that could be heard was a lone cough from the rear of the room. In your current era, the world outside the shield surrounding this island is suffering from a sickness which, at its zenith, resulted in the loss of millions of lives. 30 days from today, your shield will go down as it normally does when the plasma emitters fail. The replacement of these emitters only takes about a minute. But in the span of that particular minute, a lone human will be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He will sail past the position of the shield and land on your shores. Unfortunately, he will bring with him this same sickness that, unless something is done, will cause the complete extinction of every man, woman, and child on this island. 1 month after he lands, you will all be dead. The mood of the room, the mood of the entire island, changed from one of wonderment to dire hopelessness. All Galimarians were convinced Jason was exactly who he said he was, and now that he had just prophesied the complete destruction of their species, all were at a complete loss as to what to do. A lesser evolved society would simply allow that human to lose his life at the shield, said Jason, and not make it to your island. But I know this is not an option for an enlightened society such as yours. But since your species will have been erased from the planet in my timeline, there would be no one to repair your machine when it breaks down 700 years from now. However, I bring you hope. Gesturing to the cases he brought with him, Jason said, With me, I bring medicines from my century that we use to treat and cure cases of this sickness, which we still experience from time to time. I have not only brought with me a supply of the medicine for you to use, but I have also brought with me information on how to synthesize this same medicine. That way, you will have enough to give to any who may need it, and your species will not have to suffer this catastrophe. At this point, one and all in the council chamber rose to their feet and began clapping their hands over the relief they felt. Cheers hailed Jason, but after a few moments of this, he raised his hands in a request for silence. Eventually, they all retook their seats and allowed Jason to continue speaking. Thank you for that, and thank you for your warm reception. In the next few weeks, I look forward to learning more about you and becoming close friends. However, there is something else I need to say. Jason related the story of Terry Lindstrom and how she had discovered an amulet which had been spirited off the island. He related how Corlin, the amulet companion, taught Terry about New Galimar, and about how the tectonic stabilization machine had sent an urgent signal asking any who heard it to respond. He related the story of how she first visited the island, only to discover that all Galimarians were dead, and how that eventually led to his visit. Jason then related how the Earth was on the brink of destruction due to the supervolcano in Yellowstone National Park in the United States, and how their machine was the only thing able to quell the impending doom. If the volcano were allowed to erupt, it would result in the death of every living thing on the face of the Earth, an extinction-level event. I have related this story to you, said Jason, for a very important reason. All these events leading up to my arrival in your time on your island must still happen exactly as I have just related to you. If they don't, and if at any point in the timeline something is altered, such as my visit here being interrupted, then not only will your race be destroyed, but so will mine. Without asking to be recognized, an individual in the front row stood and was about to say something. When Jason saw who it was, he said, "The floor recognizes Lord Krelon Telendor." A normally very poised Krelon was suddenly at a loss for words at being recognized by Jason, a man he had never met. The other council members were nothing less than floored by the spectacle. Inadvertently, Jason gained even more credence by this simple act. All in the room realized Jason would not know who Krelon was unless everything he was saying was true. "I must say you have completely taken me by surprise, and I am honored for you to call me by name," said Krelon. "My question is simple. How do you propose we avert this disaster?" In answer, Jason replied, As I was preparing for this trip, I was speaking with Quirlin, who is as wise as she is beautiful. She was the one who actually came up with the idea. She proposed that after the man who lands on your shores is cured, you should make fake representations of your bodies, which will look like you died while lying on your beds in your respective homes. Once that task is complete, all of you, including the man who lands on the island, must lock yourselves away in suspended animation chambers with a timer, allowing you to awaken at the very same moment I come back in time. You will then repair your machine, save the planet, save yourselves, and save every human being. It is important that the suspended animation chambers for all of you be located somewhere we won't discover in my timeline. The suspended animation chamber for the human who lands will need to be in a place where he can be discovered by us in the future. It is also critical that each and every one of you keep the news of my visitation from your amulet companions, so as to not divulge the true course of events surrounding my arrival here today to anyone they might meet in my timeline. By this time, Krelon had sat back down, and all who heard Quirlin's solution understood the responsibility they now had. After hearing the overall assent his fellow council members were expressing, Krelon stood again and held up his arms to ask for silence among his contemporaries. Turning to Jason, he said, "All that you are saying, we shall do." Hey, fellow Galimarians, this is Dan Adrian, and I just wanted to say thank you for listening to my book. If you can, please click like down below, because it really helps me bring these videos to you and lets me know what you like. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe and click on the bell so that you'll get notified when I release more chapters. If you have any questions about this or any other of my books, or if you want to know more about what it takes to write a novel like this one, please make sure you leave your question in the comments below. Thanks again. I'll see you soon.